Sharper than a serpent's tooth. Written by the Hanged Man 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 28.
Tokoyami's quirk is so incredible! It's almost impossible to sneak up on him, and even if you do, Dark Shadow can easily operate as a defensive quirk. Although I think that maybe he could work on his hand-to-hand, because right now that's his biggest weakness.
Uh-huh. Era nudged the food on her tray, only glancing up occasionally to feign the barest of interest. Not that Midoriya seemed to mind. It appeared that he was happy to just ramble on and on whenever someone got him started.
And Jiro! Her quirk can obviously interact with and disrupt technology, but I wonder how far it can go. I wonder if her earlobes can feel pain or if they're more sensitive? Probably the latter, because there must be some sort of electrical pulse that has to be carried by nerves of some kind, so if she overextends, it could really cost her.
Era's nose wrinkled in distaste. It wasn't that she resented the implications of such an analysis. Far from it. The willingness to see such weakness and act upon it was as essential to her past work as breathing. But to have him so willingly spill the weaknesses of others to her? Midoriya?
Would it be possible for Kaminari's electricity to disrupt her pulse somehow? Obviously, Jiro's quirk is based heavily around frequencies, but it seems like it'd have the possibility to be a poor matchup for her depending on how it works. Just like Asui would be a poor matchup for Kacchan or Todoroki, given her problems with extreme temperature. Oh, do you think she absorbs things through her skin like a frog does? That's probably dangerous too. Do you think aerosol quirks would be more effective against her?
Midoriya! Era snapped, instantly regretting it as he winced, and hastily covered his mouth with a hand. Fuck, he looked like a kicked puppy.
I'm sorry, was I rambling again?
No, it's fine, it's not that. Era sighed, for once immensely grateful to spot Uraraka and Ida heading over to their table. It was bad enough for them to insist that they sit with her, but being forced to have a one-on-one conversation? Despicable. At least Midoriya usually didn't demand much of a response. Just, do you think your classmates would appreciate you telling all of their possible weaknesses to some random Gen Ed kid? Midoriya grew flushed, shifting in his seat.
Well, I mean, it's not like it's anything real, you know? It's just some random thoughts. I'm sure everyone already thought of it. Honestly,
I don't think anyone's thought of the intricacies of Asui's quirk and how it would interact with very specific attacks, no, said Era dryly. If you want to tell her about it, then that's your own prerogative. But don't tell me. You shouldn't trust me. Running a hand through his hair, Midoriya laughed uncomfortably.
Well, I mean, I guess you're right.
He didn't sound convinced. But at the very least, maybe he'd stop spouting out whether one of his classmates might be particularly vulnerable to polyester or whatever. The sports festival's coming up, Era pressed. Everyone probably wants to keep their cards close to their chest.
What about the sports festival?
Asked Uraraka as she set down her tray, rushing on without waiting for a response.
I'm training as hard as I can, so I can show everyone my absolute best.
Era blinked for a moment at the intensity rolling off of her in waves. Are you okay?
What? Of course I am.
Uraraka stabbed viciously at her food, smile never leaving her face.
Why would you even ask that?
Silently, but without any hint of doubt, Era bumped Uraraka up on the ever-growing list of potential threats.
Era!
Ida sat down as well, breaking the strange tension that had blanketed the table.
I was wondering how the general education students are preparing for the festival.
Why?
As class rep, it's my duty to ensure we are training as effectively as possible. A different perspective could be indispensable. It would be pretty interesting to know how the other courses are preparing,
said Midoriya thoughtfully.
The support course is probably designing a ton of crazy stuff.
Well, gen ed is pretty boring, Era admitted. We've had a couple more gym classes on hand-to-hand, and they've given us some free time for individual quirk training on campus, but that's really it. She decided to omit her own personal training sessions with Aizawa and Shinsou. It was as she said. Everyone was going to be keeping their cards close to their chest. Era practically dealt in secrets, so what was one more? Besides, knowing Midoriya, he'd probably already figured it out. Ida looked a little disappointed, but he didn't allow himself to falter.
Well, it's good that they're giving you time to train on your own. I assume you're taking advantage of it?
Era shrugged. Yeah, I suppose. She couldn't really train a quirk that didn't exist, but she did make use of the weight room and the various obstacle courses.
Is the support course even allowed to use their stuff?
Asked Uraraka.
I thought we weren't allowed to use any gear. You can use gear as long as you register it, and I think the support course is allowed to bring anything they built themselves,
answered Midoriya. That makes sense, muttered Era, not looking up from her food. Otherwise, they'd be at a huge disadvantage. And there's more to a fight than strength or skill. Gear can make a huge difference.
Yeah,
said Midoriya excitedly.
There are plenty of heroes who use support gear to get an edge in a fight, like Airjet or Snipe.
Era snorted. I feel like gun doesn't really count as support gear.
Snipe doesn't just use a regular gun. He has several kinds of bullets, some that are regular rounds, but some that are meant to deliver tranquilizers or other non-lethal.
Wait. Era looked up at Midoriya through narrowed eyes. Wait. We're allowed to register support gear. He nodded. And Snipe's guns count as support gear. He nodded again. So in theory, could a contestant register a gun? Midoriya hesitated, bringing his hand to his chin.
I mean, you'd have to build it yourself, and I'm pretty sure that they won't allow anything that's lethal, but...
A gun?
Ida cried.
Why would you want to register a gun? And more importantly, why would anyone allow that?
Look, I didn't write the rules. I'm just figuring out how to exploit them. What's the registration process? Midoriya shrugged.
I wasn't really planning on registering any gear.
Neither was I,
said Uraraka.
But it's probably more of a support course thing, right?
Era hummed, taking another bite of her food and trying to ignore how it sat uncomfortably in her empty stomach. Shit, she needed to go out and buy more food, or she'd be wiped out by the time the sports festival came around. Fucking League of Villains and their stupid fucking name. She'd had a plan. She'd had a briefcase full of yen. But of course some goddamn villains had to come around and ruin it. If she ever ran into them again, she was taking far more than a finger.
Hey, Suzuki?
Era looked up to find Midoriya staring back at her with wide, green eyes. Era.
Right. Sorry. I know that you're, trying to get into the hero course, and I know that general education probably isn't doing all the stuff that we are, so, the point is, I guess...
Geto's asking if you'd like to train with us.
Uraraka cut in with a smile, and their earnest expressions were the only thing keeping Era from laughter. Instead, she paused for a moment, considering. Thank you for the offer, but I think it'd be better if I trained on my own. At their crestfallen faces, Era hastily added, It's just that the sports festival is a competition, you know? I want to get into the spirit of it. Uraraka brightened, pumping a fist into the air.
Right! Let's get out there and show everyone what we're made of!
Ida nodded, pushing his glasses up along the bridge of his nose.
You know, the other day there were several students waiting outside of our classroom. I think they were also trying to get into the spirit of the competition, as you said.
That sounds more like an ambush, but sure. If Era ever found a crowd waiting outside of her classroom door, she would turn right around and leave through the window.
It was a declaration of war, said Midoriya softly. From 1B and from general studies.
Era nearly choked on her food, swallowing down her laughter with a wheezing cough. That is the most melodramatic thing I've ever heard. What? Did they throw down a glove as well? Who was it? Tell me their names right now.
Well, Shinsou said something too, but I think he was mostly trying to get a rise out of Kachan.
Era choked for real. Stop laughing at me. A declaration of war? Shinsou scowled at Era, pulling ahead of her as they walked down the hallway. It's not funny. This is serious. Yeah, sure. This high school competition sure is serious. It is, Shinsou insisted. I need to beat them or else I'm never going to get on the hero track. You're going to get in. You don't need to announce it to the world. I have to... What? Shinsou paused, turning to stare back at her. Era brushed past him with a shrug. It's a fact. You will get into the hero course. I don't know why you need to get all dramatic about it. Well, don't you sound sure of yourself? Your quirk is insanely powerful, you've made a lot of progress with your physical training, and you have an incredible drive. Era listed easily, unsure why he was fighting her on this so intently. UA was already negligent when he didn't let you in the first time. To do so now would be nothing less than idiotic, and now that idiocy would be on national television. My quirk isn't that great, Shinsou muttered. And now it was Era's turn to spin back around with a quizzical stare. In a one-on-one fight, you have a distinct advantage. Your win condition is simple and easily achieved. Not if they know. It's an information game, yes, but when you control. Besides, even with all of the facts, people still make mistakes all of the time. But it's easy to break out of if... Why are you arguing with me? Era walked towards him, thankful for the empty hallways. There's no reason for me to lie about this. What, do you think I'm trying to lull you into a false sense of security or something? That wouldn't really benefit me. Rolling his eyes, Shinsou let out a huff of shaky laughter. Not everyone thinks like you. Like me? It isn't... That wouldn't be my first conclusion. That you're lying to me, so I'll let my guard down. That's not what people usually jump to. Then what? You obviously don't believe me. Shinsou hesitated, avoiding her piercing gaze as he uncomfortably rubbed at the back of his neck. Have you never... well, sometimes people lie to you in order to make you feel better. Or so they don't seem rude. Or haven't you ever been worried someone was only saying something to keep your feelings from getting hurt? No one had ever spared Era's feelings since... birth? If anything, there were times where she knew for a fact that a trainer was lying in order to belittle her, downplaying her accomplishments to make it seem like she had achieved only the bare minimum. And that wasn't even counting the undeserved punishments. The lulls between her mistakes that stretched too long for her handler's liking, so they needed to be interrupted by manufactured errors and nitpicks and rules that never existed before she broke them. Wow, said Shinsou dryly when Era took too long to respond. Just that confident, I guess. I don't need other people telling me what I can do. I can assess that for myself. Don't say that around Aizawa-sensei. Era huffed, continuing down the hallway. Why do you worship that man? What? Shinsou spluttered, following her.
I don't worship him.
Oh, really? Era pitched her voice low in mocking imitation.
Don't do that where Aizawa-sensei can see it. Era, you're going to give Aizawa-sensei a heart attack. Aizawa-sensei would know how to counter that move.
I bet you have a pair of Eraserhead goggles hidden in your room somewhere. Shinsou flushed.
I do not.
I won't tell. Era teased with a grin. But I bet you do.
Look, he's just...
Shinsou cut himself off with a strangled noise before sighing.
You're the worst.
Categorically, yes.
Eraserhead is... I don't know. He doesn't have a flashy quirk, I guess. But he's still a hero.
Era hummed, glancing at a door as they walked past. They were definitely lost, but she'd never admit it. And you think that you don't have a flashy quirk either. You want to go underground too. I suppose it makes sense. The thing is, there are a lot of underground heroes.
Erasing other people's quirks isn't very heroic.
Perfect for hostage situations, for de-escalating tension, for quickly apprehending a dangerous villain with minimum casualties.
How the fuck was that not heroic?
Elaborate.
It's a cheater's quirk,
muttered Shinsou.
It turns off other people's powers. That it makes some people uncomfortable.
Era felt a wrinkle in her nose and quickly smoothed it flat. How would her old trainers react if they suddenly found their quirks beyond their grasp? Negatively. Very, very negatively. Not even out of a sense of helplessness. She knew full well that most of them could operate just fine without their quirks. No, it was the principle of the thing. A slight to be met with violence. But Era wasn't sure how well that tracked to the real world.
I suppose? Well, how would you feel if you suddenly didn't have your quirk?
I'd probably be in a lot less pain. Or dead. Either way. Era shrugged. I can't really turn it off, so I guess I've never really thought of it.
Well, you're just weird. Most people would be upset. It's kind of a villain's quirk.
A villain's quirk? What the fuck does that even mean?
Fuck. This is going to be the longest conversation of my life.
Shinsou groaned.
Have you been living under a rock?
More like 200 feet underground, but same difference.
There's no such thing as a villain's quirk. There are just quirks. And there are villains. And there are villains with quirks. Oh, says you. Is this a difficult concept to understand, or am I missing something? I don't know. Is it?
Shinsou snapped.
I mean, you're the one who freaked out the first time I used my quirk on you.
Era winced. That doesn't make it a villain's quirk.
Then why?
Shinsou sighed, rubbing at his eyes.
I'm sorry, it doesn't matter.
Apparently it does. Era didn't want to let this fester.
It shouldn't, but it does.
Fuck. Okay, this isn't really any of your business, and I need you to promise there will be absolutely no follow-up questions.
Concerning? But what else is new?
At her silent insistence, he rolled his eyes.
Fine. Your quirk reminded me of something else, and that's what freaked me out, okay? It wasn't because it was a villain's quirk or some bullshit.
Shinsou stared at her, eyes narrowing.
Okay, I know I said that. Nope, you promised. But that's really raising more questions than it. Oh, look, we're here.
Era stopped in front of the door to the development studio, eagerly reaching for the handle.
This conversation isn't... Yes, it is. I am opening this door, and that means we have moved on to a new topic. The fact that you're dodging the... Fucking hell, fine!
Era released the handle and whirled around on Shinsou.
You are the most stubborn piece of shit I've ever met. I get it. You idolized Eraserhead because you've both got mental quirks that were probably discriminated against. I have unwittingly contributed to whatever fucking complex you have. I'm only telling you this because I want to make it absolutely clear that I don't fucking care what your quirk is. That this is a me problem and has nothing to do with you or how well suited you are to being a hero. Okay? You don't care? Once again, why would I lie? You know what? Fuck Eraserhead. Here's a lesson you could actually use. When you think someone's lying to you, a good first step is to figure out why. But here are a few reasons I could be lying to you about this. 1, I am trying to manipulate you into trusting me. That doesn't make any sense because we're already friends, and this conversation is clearly making you more uncomfortable than whatever trust I stand to gain. 2, I'm trying to mask my own weakness by making it seem like I'm not afraid of you or your quirk when I actually am. Again, this falls apart because I have already admitted that my reaction was personal and have not made any indication I wouldn't have the reaction again. If anything, I appear more weak. 3, Okay, I get it.
Shinsou leaned against the wall with a groan.
Were you always like this? Like, running at 100% all day long? Because it looks exhausting.
Era sighed.
I'm just trying to help you understand. Well, thanks, I think. But now I'm a little more concerned about my friend being a murder robot than anything else.
With a snort, Era reached for the door again.
Now that is a valid fear. You're not good at sarcasm. Please stop trying it.
Who says it was sarcasm?
I fucking hate you. It's part of my charm.
The moment they entered the lab, Era twisted to the side to avoid getting beheaded by a flying piece of shrapnel.
She lives!
Hatsume!
Of course, she needs a few adjustments to the propulsion system, but...
Hello?
Called Shinsou,
pushing past Era into the studio. We almost had a casualty here. I'm fine, muttered Era. It wasn't any worse than combat training. Or that time Argus had decided to be fun to ambush her every so often in order to improve her situational awareness. That had been a long month. It didn't even hit me. Yeah, because your reflexes are insane. I'm blushing.
A long, suffering sigh drifted over from the corner of the room, where Era looked to find Power Loader sitting by the desk, surrounded by a mountain of paperwork.
I apologize for my students' antics.
Ingenuity, invention, progress marches onward.
A manic voice called, presumably from the cloud of smoke by one of the lab tables.
Progress needs to brush up on her safety regulations,
said Power Loader dryly, before focusing his attention on the 2 newcomers.
You aren't support students? Is there anything you need? Are you here to register gear? Those forms are supposed to go through the office, but I can't take them now.
He gestured to the huge stack of paper.
Might as well.
Is the development studio only for support course students? Asked Era, eyes darting around the room.
Technically, I don't know. Practically, doesn't really come up. What if it's coming up right now? Well, it's not like you can be more destructive than that one, so knock yourself out.
Behind Era, Shinsou laughed.
You're going to eat those words.
Era clapped her hands together with a grin.
Too late. I have received permission. I will now go absolutely crazy. I can rescind this at any time. It's my studio.
I will now go just a little bit crazy. Powerloader gave another heavy sigh.
I was put on this earth to suffer.
Another cry emerged from the cloud of smoke.
Model 2.8, flight test number 37. Slight modification to propulsion coils in order to reduce likelihood of spontaneous combustion. Ready for ignition.
Hatsume, do not!
Powerloader didn't even move from his seat as a blur of pink and ashy gray shot out from the cloud of smoke and slammed into the ceiling with a soft oof.
Flight successful.
Her voice sounded strained, pressed up against the ceiling as she was. Through the soot, Era could vaguely make out the faint glow along her shoes.
Propulsion still requires adjustment and the power output needs to be...
Abruptly, with a shuddering, gasping sort of noise, the light along her shoes died out, and the girl went plummeting to the ground with a deafening crash, followed by a cacophonous series of clattering sounds that suggested more destruction than met the eye.
Power failure after approximate 10 seconds of flight time.
Came a wheeze.
Adjustment to propulsion and output for more optimal efficiency should offset this.
Well, isn't that a relief?
Muttered Powerloader, dusting off a piece of paper in front of him before dutifully marking it up with a grumble.
I don't understand why we post the rules if no one bothers to read them. Anyway, there should be plenty of equipment to get you started on whatever you want, so knock yourself out. Hopefully Hatsume hasn't destroyed it all.
Thank you, sir. Era cautiously picked her way around the tables, covered with scattered equipment so painfully experimental that it seemed a stiff breeze away from exploding. Sorry to disturb you, but I do have a question about gear registration if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Can general study students register gear?
I don't see why not, as long as it follows the rules.
He looked up from his paperwork.
Everything must be made by yourself. Gear must be at least functional enough not to fall apart and cause unnecessary danger, and obviously nothing lethal.
So, weapons allowed?
As long as they're not lethal, yeah.
Powerloader paused, voice turning suspicious.
Why?
Knives, Era pressed, not bothering with the response. Would knives count as lethal?
I suppose it depends. I might allow it if they were dulled.
But there are quirks that are far deadlier than knives. Powerloader groaned, pulling out the next bunch of papers.
How about I consider it upon review? Are you planning on making knives?
Era just hummed thoughtfully, walking across the room to examine the equipment that wasn't obscured by smoke. Guns allowed?
Non-lethal,
repeated Powerloader warily. Dart guns, paint guns, airsoft, whatever.
Permitted.
Era grinned, and Shinsou placed his head in his hands. This was a terrible idea. Why did you bring me here again? Don't you want a leg up on the competition? I don't know how to make any of this stuff. Why do you? Good skill to have, replied Era. Oh boy, did they really have a forge? How literal were they going to be with this make-it-yourself rule? Because Era didn't think she could forge the individual pieces of a gun, but she was relatively sure she could jury-rig something out of spare parts if needed. Knives, on the other hand, she might be able to craft herself. Even if the forge's heat made her skin prick uncomfortably with pale memories, she could at the very least make use of the skills she'd been taught instead of letting them burrow through her mind like mealworms.
Test subjects.
Hatsume, no,
said Powerloader without any inflection.
Stop. Don't.
Hatsume, yes.
That blur of ash and pink and manic energy burst from the clearing smoke once more, rushing towards Era and Shinsou.
My fellow students, welcome to the design studio, workplace of Hatsume Mei, future CEO of Hatsume Support Tech Industries, name subject to change.
Ah, said Era intelligently. It's nice to meet you.
And you as well. Are you interested in testing out any of my babies?
Excuse me? Shinsou took back a step from the commotion, arms crossed.
My babies,
repeated Hatsume, motioning down at her clunky, soot-covered boots.
Perhaps you'd be interested in a pair of hover boots? Model 2.9 coming soon.
Joy, said Power Loader, shuffling through another set of papers. That's pretty impressive, muttered Era begrudgingly, glancing down at the shoes. The design's sleek in comparison to the market competition, and obviously you're not having a power issue, even with such a compact design.
I know, right? It's all thanks to my custom power coils, patent pending. Plus an ultralight material to keep heroes light on their feet.
Era frowned. Are you concerned about warping or durability? If the material is so light, does it break down easily?
Ah, a gene eye!
Hatsume crowed, clunking over to one of the lab table with heavy footballs.
This is an extra special compound of my own design. It took forever to get the composition right, but the end result is super worth it. Lightweight and tough enough to withstand several explosions. Trust me, it's been well tested.
It really has,
commented Power Loader dryly.
Unfortunately.
What about heat insulation? Era pressed. There must be a lot of heat generation. Are you concerned about burning the user?
A Parisian question, but as you see, here are a set of fans to vent all that heat away and through the hover souls themselves, thus aiding in lift and thrust. And just in case, a set of insulating fabric in the unlikely event of overheating.
Era's begrudging respect bloomed to something more sincere. Again, that's really impressive. You have a great eye for design. Though I suppose that's not surprising, coming from someone in the support course.
Nope, that's just the overwhelming genius of Hatsume Mei at work. That's HATSU.
This isn't a scout, Hatsume. Please stop promoting your inventions.
Hatsume shot Power Loader a blinding smile.
But how else will I practice my pitch if not on unsuspecting bystanders?
Holy shit. During their conversation, Shinsou had somehow managed to put half the room between himself and Hatsume without either of them noticing. She's like you, but worse. What? I don't attack random people or make things explode, objected Era, but Shinsou just shook his head. If you were just 10% more unhinged.
The small-minded always fear those who carry society forward.
More like drag society kicking and screaming,
muttered Power Loader. Era coughed, half to settle the tension in her shoulders, and half to clear the smoke from her lungs. Well, I'm Suzuki Era. I'm probably going to be over here a lot over the next few days. She glanced at the machinery, hands itching to get to work, but a little unsure of where to start, as an indisputably stupid kernel of an idea began to form in her mind. Say, Hatsume? The girl had already begun work adjusting her hover shoes, but she looked up with a questioning, You said you wanted someone to test your babies. Her soot-stained face split into a manic grin.
Yes?
Well, began Era, certain that she would regret this, but not quite finding it in herself to care. If I help you with that, would you be willing to help me with my own designs? I'm not sure how to use some of this equipment, and I'm a little rusty when it comes to... Hatsume was already bounding towards her, grabbing Era's hands and yanking her towards the machinery with reckless glee.
Transaction accepted, new test subject. Now, I have a couple of beauties right here that I've been dying to test out, but for some reason no one will try for me.
At his desk, surrounded by ash-dusted paper, Power Loader sighed.
God help us all.
End of chapter 28.